Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining today this very interesting presentation of Ayming's Innovation Barometer. Ayming is the knowledge partner of the Innovation Committee of the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain, and I am Eva Prada, the Managing Director of the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain, a British Spain Independent Business Association. My role today will be to lead the session and to introduce each session and each speaker. I want to spend a lot of time because the president of the Innovation Committee of the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain is going to give the framework of who we are and why we are doing what we're doing today. Something important in terms of the format of the event, this is going to be a webinar where all the speakers are going to be speaking remotely, and we would appreciate if you can all have your videos and audio in mute until the Q&A section at the end, where you will be able to put questions through the chat application. Without further ado, and to accomplish with the British punctuality, I'd like to hand over to Guillermo de Juan, Vice President and Director of Government Affairs of GlaxoSmithKline, and also the President of the Innovation Committee of the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain, who's going to explain the role of this committee and the importance of the event today. Guillermo, all yours.
Thank you very much, Eva, and really welcome to this webinar that we are going to present the International Barometer of Innovation carried out by Ayming. You know, Ayming is the knowledge partner of our Innovation Committee. Thanks to all the attendees, really all the represented institutions that having time today to dedicate to innovation, and of course to Ayming in the presentation of this Innovation Barometer. A special thanks to mention to Clara Eugenia Garcia, Science and Innovation Coordinating Counselor of the Permanent Representation of Spain to the European Union. Thank you very much for your support, really, and your participation. From us and Innovation Committee, is really important that you be here because we need this type of public and private dialogue is really key and important for us. And so it's an honor that you are here today. Let me tell you a bit more about the British Chambers and the Innovation Committee and this event. For those of you who do not know us, the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain is a private business association. The mission is really probably you know that each member we publish a barometer of British investment. Last year it was the 5th edition, I think so. It was the 5th edition, and it revealed that the United Kingdom is the biggest global investor in Spain, with more than 3,125 billion euros in only the first 6 months of the year. So you can imagine what does it mean. It means that the British companies are responsible for maintaining around more than 200,000 jobs in Spain. Probably you know that, but on the 17th of November, we will present the 6th edition of this study, and very good data. It shows that the increase of British investment in Spain. So if you are interested in joining the webinar next 17th of November, please, you can register through the website in the British Chamber's website. You are very welcome to this event. But why I'm saying this, because I think we must not forget the bilateral trade between the two countries represents more than 56,000 million euros. So, and that's really important. In the above mentioned parameter, you can put on mute because there's a big sound in the background. Thank you. I was saying that in the above mentioned barometer, we surveyed the climate of business in Spain. Give you an example, no? Of a large numbers of British businesses here in our country, and this service indicates that the key barrier for more British investors coming to our country is that Spain's current investment in R&D is not enough, is not sufficient. This is a big concern from British companies, and this is reflected. Giving you an example, the position of Spain in the Global Innovation Index in 2019 from the World Intellectual Property Organization. Our country occupies, I think it is the 29th position, whereas the UK finds itself the 5th. So as well, this index awards Spain a mark of 47.8, while the UK, on the other hand, is one of the countries of reference as it's shown by its mark of 61. What does it mean? I mean, at the end of the day, Spain produced around 3.2% of the global scientific production and represents 1% of the total spend. So the strong trade and innovation relationship between our countries is also visible in the scientific and innovation world. As well, good data about Brexit as well. I think the survey it says that more than 90% of the British Chamber's members companies were not in favor of Brexit, but the majority still want to continue doing business and maintaining personal links between both countries. I think that's important, the bilateral interaction between two countries. I think, and for that reason, I think the British Chamber works really to build bridges, knowledge and business opportunities for the continuation of Spain and the UK relation. And I said the objectives of this innovation committee that I have the honor to be the president is to give visibility, firstly, to the innovation carried out by Spanish and British companies in Spain, much more than that's shown in the global indexes, of course. Second is to generate debate and a favorable environment for innovation in order to attract more investment, that's key. And thirdly, to identify best practices and facilitating collaboration between Spain and the United Kingdom, especially in the relevant moment when the UK is leaving the European Union. The Innovation Committee is currently made up of GSK, AstraZeneca, two big pharmaceutical companies, Evolution, Telefónica, Iberdrola, and Grupo Gestam. I think we also count with the support, of course, always thanks to Ayming, because Ayming is our knowledge partner, and the Science and Innovation Department of the British Embassy, always the British Embassy supporting our activities in Spain, and as well good relation with the Fundación Cotec. How we work, I think we have regular meetings with key stakeholders to build alliances, to work on our objectives. We also organize webinars every quarter about different aspects and sectors of innovation in Spain and the United Kingdom. And one example of this webinar is this today. And lastly, as the president of Innovation Committee and I'm part of GSK. GSK, you know, is an innovative biopharmaceutical company which invested 4.3 billion pounds in R&D activities in 2019 and employing over 60,000 people across the three global businesses that are vaccines, pharmaceutical, and consumer healthcare. We are focusing on science, of course, related to the immune system, the use of human genetics, advanced technologies, and of course now in this health crisis, in COVID vaccines collaboration strategy, top companies focus on the role of adjuvanted vaccines. Well, I think that we recognize in the Innovation Committee the vital importance of innovation. Really, we think that is one of the principal tools which can be leveraged both to recover from the sanitary and economic crisis, of course, and we are all of us waiting for looking forward for the vaccine as one of the way to face COVID pandemic and to strengthen this bilateral relation. I think we can see today in the webinar, thanks to Ayming, that we will gain an enhanced understanding of the current international landscape. That's very positive for innovation. Probably we will hear an analysis of R&D, the current you will find this meeting interesting and very useful. I just want to thank, of course, again, Ayming of the British Chamber, the British Embassy for organizing this presentation. That is, I think, is a truly example of institutional collaboration for the benefit always of the innovation. So with this, Eva, I think we can go ahead with the event today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guillermo. We feel very honored to have you today and represent the interest of the committee, which is really the one that is making possible this webinar. Now we would go into the second part of the webinar, which is the most important one, where we will have two experts presenting the results of the International Barometer. In order to make it more entertaining and more dynamic, we propose that instead of individual presentations, we have some sort of colloquium in which I will introduce the speakers and I will start with a series of questions in which they will be covering the key aspects of the Innovation Barometer and the impact it has in both countries. And we will then go on to an opportunity for the audience to ask questions through the chat. The two speakers that we've got today are Mark Smith, who is Ayming's partner for innovation incentives in the United Kingdom. Mark has a master in engineering and is a chartered accountant and chartered tax advisor with a wealth of experience in the R&D incentives environment. Laura Delgado is a senior industrial engineer. She's got more than 15 years experience in the innovation consultancy sector, where she has been Director of Innovation for Spain and Portugal, Managing Partner and part of the Spanish Management Committee, and Director of the Southern Region for Ayming. Both Laura and Mark were very involved in the creation of this international barometer. We're looking forward to hearing what they've got to say to us. We are most of the time within the framework of our Innovation Committee discussing bilateral issues, but everybody will understand that innovation doesn't have any barriers. So having an idea of what is happening in a more international environment is going to be of a lot of interest to us. So I hand over now to Laura.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva. Thank you to the British Chamber of Commerce for letting us present our second edition of the International Innovation Barometer today. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We are very proud of this year's report, which takes a deep dive into global innovation trends and couldn't come at a more important time. As we sit here today, the world is struggling to cope with economic and social implications of the coronavirus crisis, and innovation, primarily by finding treatments and a vaccine, is humanity's best hope to protect both lives and the economy. It is perhaps not unreasonable to say that R&D has never been more important. And while the pandemic is applying some pressure to budgets, the overall picture remains one of hope. Technology continues to evolve, unlocking new solutions to our world. This opportunity sustainably to build a better future. Let's not forget, coronavirus is not the only crisis facing the planet. The climate conundrum looms as large as ever, and innovation again holds the keys to escaping its worst effects. So, are firms focusing on sustainable innovation? What's driving such efforts? And what needs to happen to improve businesses' ability to sustainably innovate? In this year's barometer, we answer all these questions and more, as well as looking a little deeper into the state of innovation today and how best we can fund it into tomorrow. We hope it sparks some new ideas and constructive conversation, as well as consider the ways we can improve as individual nation and as a global community. So we encourage you to take a look at the report, and now we can go through the main insights. Thank you, Eva.
My pleasure. Right, so if Mark and you are ready, I'd like now to start the conversation, a dialogue in which you will be focusing on the different aspects and the key findings of this very interesting International Innovation Barometer. If I understand correctly, this barometer, the respondents were asked whether they carry out their innovation locally, internationally, or both. And the results from the report for Spain and the UK are showing, which are actually portrayed now on the screen. Spain carries out more innovation, both internationally and locally, while the UK focuses on innovation locally. This is probably something that is not that well known. So Mark and Laura, what do you think are the influences that are driving the differences in the Spanish and British answers to this question? You can take the turns as you wish.
Do you want me to step in first, Laura?
Yes, please, Mark.
Great. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here, and thanks to the British Chamber of Commerce for hosting this event for us today. I think it's obvious from the chart there that the UK is much more focused on local innovation, with 64% of respondents stating local only. In contrast with Spain, where 40% of respondents answered local only and 50% answered local and international. So there's obviously clear contrast between the results from both countries. And I've been reflecting and giving some thought as to what may be driving this. I think for me, the most important one is likely to be access to talent. It's highlighted elsewhere in the barometer as being one of the most important drivers of where to do innovation. And it was certainly the top driver for the UK. And the UK's got great access to talent. 4 of the in the UK. So we attract a lot of global talent to study, live and work in the UK. And these effects can be somewhat self-reinforcing. So I think that, serves to attract even more talented, scientists, researchers, engineers to the UK. So with easy access to talent locally, it could be that some firms have less need to look internationally to do their R&D. However, I think if we reflect on the time that the survey was carried out, which was earlier this year in the spring, it could be that the UK is somewhat inward focused. We conducted the survey at the height of the pandemic and during the Brexit transition year. And so British companies could immediately be looking much closer to home as the easiest and least risky option when it comes to looking where to invest in R&D. However, for me, that feels a little bit short-sighted. Even if the UK has great access to talent to draw from locally and is a great place to do R&D, data from the OECD still shows that the UK lags behind its peers in overall investment in R&D as a percentage of GDP at 1.7% for the UK. Spain is at 1.2%, and both countries are far below the OECD average of 2.4%, and well behind R&D leaders like the US, Germany, Korea, and Japan, which are all above 3%. So perhaps the UK suffers from being too inwardly focused. Collaboration is essential for tackling some of the big challenges we face today, and seeking collaboration internationally, businesses could unlock new opportunities for innovation and new opportunities for funding that innovation as well.
In addition to what Mark's saying, what we see is that, for instance, in Spain, most of the respondents, 56% actually, said that their companies carried out their innovation both locally and internationally. And this is probably related also to the number of multinational foreign companies based in Spain that develop R&D and innovation, both at their mother companies abroad and locally. And on the other hand, obviously, there is a big number of smaller businesses here that are innovative companies developing their innovation mainly in Spain. So broadly speaking, what we see in the barometer is that the process is becoming more technical and businesses are finding it difficult to create innovation without support, leading it to more outsourcing and acquisitions. This is contributing to rise in a larger businesses looking to create R&D centers abroad, creating competition for their activity. To be attractive, businesses and governments must work together to create the perfect ecosystem for fostering activity. What we found also is that what influences this the of private resources, the location of the company's organization. So again, in comparison to the UK, the Spanish companies seems to be much more influenced by the public funding available, while the UK ones more by the ability of talent.
Thank you, Laura. So this is, if I have understood correctly, more public-private collaboration would be required, being the access to public incentives key. And as I am not an innovation expert, and this is why we rely on you, Ayming, I've taken note of the 4 countries that you have mentioned, the US, Germany, Korea, and Japan. I remind the audience that the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain belongs to a large group of British chambers all over the world. We actually have British chambers in those 4 countries. So Mark and Laura, I think next set of homework for us might be to establish contact with these people to see whether we can have another webinar where we can establish some best practice with those countries. So I'll go on to the next question, if I may. When it comes to organizations funding their innovation, whether that be through tax credits, local or international grants, or other forms of funding, we once again see a marked difference between the answers from the Spanish and the British companies. Once again, you've got on the screen the answers from this study. And the question for Laura and Mark is, why do you think this is the case? Is it driven by the differences in the Spanish and UK R&D tax regimes, or is there any other reason for this? Mark and Laura, again, follow the order that you find most comfortable.
Okay, I go ahead. Yes, what is interesting here is to look at the public funding use and the type of funding. And in the case of the R&D tax regimes, actually what we see is that the answer is the same for both countries. There is real awareness of this tax regime, while 32% seems to be a little bit low in comparison to the average, and probably to the real potential application of this incentive. Many countries have implemented incentives towards R&D spending. The most popular option is R&D tax credits, which at 47% are closing the gap with self-funded. And this is indeed a positive development. And as touched on last year, tax credits are a diverse and reliable form of funding compared to grants. Tax credits applications are simpler, and crucially, the funding is volume-based and the activity is business-led as opposed to predetermined. And finally, yes, in Spain, we see there's still room for improvement in benefiting from R&D funding. Globally, sometimes we see complexity on the application of in some national regimes, such as the R&D tax scheme in comparison to other OECD countries. And this leads to a less effective incentive at the end. So here the governments need to take a look at this. And the good news are that the IREF has recently said that the relevance of these incentives is very important to boost innovation, and their recommendation is to improve the application process. And another positive news that you already know is that there is an 80% increase in the national budget for R&D. That is very good news indeed. So let's see how this impacts these results on next year Barometer.
Thanks, Laura. I completely agree with regards to R&D tax credits being business-led and volume-based. I think is really great, and it allows business to drive the innovation and be rewarded for the more that they invest in it, which is really important. When I look at the results of the Barometer for the UK, for me, it shows a broad mix of funding and no single source really obviously sticking out like it potentially does in Spain. So I think that's positive for the UK. It shows that the UK companies have a large number of options for funding R&D, and more options for funding is clearly beneficial. I think this is probably likely due to easier access to funding in the UK and the greater number of funding sources available. I regularly hear from businesses that are investing in the UK that it's much easier to find funding here than it is in many places in Europe. And quite often people will set up here due to the easy access to funding, even when they may be coming from another country in Europe. Silicon Valley, for example, is often held up as one of the most innovative places in the world. And that's just as much for the tech ecosystem, but also for the prevalence of venture capital funding in Silicon Valley too. However, with that said, I think if you look at the top 3 bars for the UK and look at them in combination as public funding support for innovation, then it's clearly a very important source of funding for UK business. I'm also a member of the Confederation of British Industry R&D Working Group, and its members really value the ongoing participation in EU grant programs such as Horizon Europe. So it would be a blow to lose this source of funding. Access to public funding is obviously very important, and the collaboration across the EU is also highly valued by UK business. So I'd encourage the UK government to take note of this importance when concluding its Brexit negotiations this year, and to make sure that we're part of Horizon Europe going forward, so we can benefit from that access to funding, but also benefit from collaboration with our European partners.
So, if I may, I think we are finding new topics that we should probably cover in the future webinars that the Innovation Committee will carry out in 2021. The different types of funding seems to be a very relevant element in both countries. And I also think that the topic that we're going to be covering next is also going to be equally important. You know that in the agenda of any country at the moment, there are 2 very important topics. One is digital transformation and the other one is sustainability. And this is precisely the next topic that I'd like to discuss with the speakers. Sustainability is never far from the news agenda, and innovation is playing an increasingly important role. As we can see from this year's edition of this barometer, there are a number of different factors that drive sustainable innovation. I'd like to know what are the views from Laura and Mark on how do they see this playing out in the UK, and from Laura, how do you see this playing out in Spain? And I already advanced that with the Innovation Committee, sustainability is going to be one of the key topics we're going to be portraying in 2021. Laura, Mark, what do you have to say about this?
Great, I'll jump in, Laura, and take this one first. Looking at the statistics, for me, the one is the one where UK and Spain are challenges, and is incompatible with business performance. So I think it's great to see that this is changing, and companies are recognizing that sustainable innovation is key for business performance, be it cost savings or developing new products, new customers, new markets. An example that springs to mind is power generation, and given that we have probably some representatives from Iberdrola, that's probably quite a pertinent topic. Many countries have been slow to embrace the move to renewable energy generation, viewing it as more costly and less reliable. And there are entrenched interests in sticking with the status quo. However, recently wind and solar are showing themselves to be much cheaper than most other forms of energy generation. I made the switch personally to a 100% renewable energy provider after I watched David Attenborough's most recent documentary, Life on Our Planet. And that saved me a substantial sum of money, whilst also being the most sustainable option. In the same documentary, it was suggested that Morocco could install huge solar fields in the Sahara and export large quantities of electricity to Europe. And this would provide a huge and sustainable source of income for the country for the long term. I see no reason why Spain couldn't be doing something very, very similar, especially given its large size, its climate, and being obviously much closer to the rest of Europe. Now that clearly wouldn't be an opportunity for the UK, but I think we could do the same with wind. I'm sure it probably doesn't surprise many people in the webinar today that the UK has by far the largest share of Europe's wind resource. And I think it's crazy that there are currently so many projects focused on allowing the UK to import electricity from Europe rather than export large quantities of wind power. Another area where we see the switch from threat to opportunity occurring is in the automotive sector. Customers are demanding cleaner vehicles, and many governments have legislated to ban petrol or diesel vehicles. And Tesla, an early pioneer in electric vehicles, is now the world's most valuable car company, despite only producing a fraction of the vehicles that its rivals do. And just recently, Volkswagen agreed to sell Bugatti to Rimac, which is a small Croatian hypercar manufacturer, sorry, electric hypercar manufacturer. I'm sure most people have never actually heard of them. The deal is intended to secure VW's access to Rimac's electric vehicle technology, because VW's realized that it's playing catch up to the likes of Tesla and others. So I think pressure is coming from consumers and governments. And it's now combining to make the direction of travel on sustainability clear. I see this trend continuing and growing stronger. So all businesses should take note and focus on the opportunity to improve business performance that sustainable innovation represents. I take great heart from the fact that both Spanish and British businesses recognize this already, and I personally hope to see that this improves in the future.
Yes, as Mark has already said, both countries reported quite similar answers in this report. In both cases, 28% of respondents said that the alignment with corporate values was one reason to boost sustainable innovation, while the average was over 40%. And 40% of respondents actually in both countries see sustainable innovation as a factor to improving business performance, which is really very interesting. Globally, the research uncovers a recurring theme whereby government intervention is seen less favorably when it comes to stimulating sustainable R&D. There are two primary ways a government can steer economies in a sustainable direction: regulation and incentives. When asked where the pressure comes from the undergo sustainable innovation, legislation was the second least important, which is slightly surprising. At present, sustainable innovation is mostly being grown organically, with businesses mainly doing it because it improves their productivity. To really give sustainable R&D a boost, governments should develop criteria to launch supercharged tax credits that can be applied to all sustainable R&D activity. So government intervention is not the silver bullet to increasing sustainable R&D, but governments must, in our opinion, push for clear definitions of sustainable supercharged.
Governments, both Spain and the UK and the European Union, maybe we should take into consideration a call to discuss these issues directly with government. I would like to remind the audience that I'm going to be launching the last question to Mark and Laura, and that today is about a dialogue with those of you that are interested in this topic, and to know what worries you, to know what are the key challenges that you're facing in your companies. And precisely in this direction, I'd like to launch a last question in which I'd like to know from Laura and Mark, how can we help companies to go back to their desks and do the plannings for 2021 from the data, from this fantastic barometer? What are the key issues, the key conclusions that we can drive to help people to prioritize in their 2021 planning, taking into account pandemic, taking into account economic recession, and taking into account the leaving of the United Kingdom from the EU?
I can start. I would say it's very important to include a good funding, a public funding plan in your budgets to make companies resilient in this situation. It's very important to have this included in your budgets. And for Spanish and EU-based companies, it's important that you bear in mind the next generation EU instrument that you know is to be defined these days by your country government. And it's very important that you check that your projects and capital expenditures plan are in line with the 750 billion the euros are going to give to the member states in the next years. And actually, this is what we're doing these days in Ayming. We are already helping many of our clients to adapt their strategies and their budgets to this new world of possibilities, so their projects can be in a better position to be considered in the future and next year for the new programs and calls for proposals. So this is key for me.
Great.
Mark?
Completely agree, Laura. So one of the major findings from the Barometer was that the majority of businesses, 86% across all countries surveyed, suggested that they were undertaking enough R&D. However, as I mentioned previously, Spain and the UK both fall behind the OECD average for R&D spend as a percentage of GDP. So, I see a bit of a juxtaposition between those two findings. And I think that the Barometer results suggest some complacency within business about the level of R&D investment that they're undertaking. Businesses are currently facing a huge number of challenges from dealing with the COVID pandemic and lockdown, political uncertainty, trade wars, and sustainability. So I think that there could be a temptation from businesses as we're preparing budgets to look for cost savings and scale back R&D budgets. But I would challenge this view. I think firms need to invest more in innovation, and the ones that do invest more in innovation are going to be the ones that succeed in tackling these challenges and that thrive in the future. So my advice is to challenge that complacency, question yourself, are you really doing enough R&D? And be bold, don't retrench, look for opportunities and invest in R&D for growth.
So Mark, before I start taking questions from the audience, did I understand you correctly? Do you think that the key challenge for a higher investment in R&D, which the study shows, and it might be a surprise for a lot of us, the fact that both Spain and the UK fall behind the OECD rates of expenditure. Are you saying that the necessity of cost savings at the moment may make us forget and pay more attention to what is urgent rather than what is important, and not be focusing on a higher investment on innovation? Am I understanding you?
I certainly think that could be a risk. Yeah. There's so much pressure on business at the moment that you've got to look for cost savings, everywhere you can find them. But the R&D is a sort of long-term bet, and you could scale back R&D spend in the short term, but actually potentially to
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I already see one first question through the chat. Laura and Mark, I would appreciate if you can jump to answer them as you wish. Leon Molchanovsky is going back to the roots, asking it would help if you mentioned your definition of innovation in your research to understand your starting point. For example, there is big difference between innovation developing a quantum computer or innovation implementing CRM software in a hotel. How
Mark,
do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure that respondents were provided with a detailed definition of what would be described as innovation when we carried out the survey. But certainly we would have pushed respondents to think as broad as possible in their definition of R&D. I think nobody really needs a definition of R&D or innovation to point to developing quantum computing as clearly being research and development. Whereas it may surprise some that developing a CRM system for a hotel could also be viewed as research and development. And that's something that both Lara and I will have picked up over our years of experience in dealing with R&D tax credit claims, is that actually the definition is very, very broad. And people are often surprised at the sorts of activities that can be included in an R&D claim. That I hesitate to call them low-level activities. They're certainly not as technically challenging as developing quantum computing, but they do still involve technical challenges. And they may not just be what your average person on the street, or to coin a UK phrase, the man on the Clapham omnibus. That is not what your regular person views as R&D, but it's squarely within the definition for R&D tax credits, and that definition comes from the OECD definition used in the Frascati manual. So I believe that the survey was carried out using as broad a definition as possible.
Yes, I guess it was like that. And what we see also in the Barometer is what there is awareness of what innovation is globally, broadly speaking, more or less. But what is important is that we define somehow the sustainable R&D. This is very important to be clarified by governments when it comes to regulation and incentives. So this is something that will be really key innovation, there's still some room for awareness, but there are main definitions like the Frascati ones that are the ones that globally, I think, all companies and businesses and governments use. So we need to clarify more on the sustainable and R&D part, I think.
Thank you both. I see that Rebecca is mentioning in the chat something very important, which is that everybody can download a copy of this international barometer, either in English or in Spanish, which will help you to have within your remit access to some of the information that has been provided in case that you need to use it for your own purposes. Going back to the importance of having more tax incentives and government policies, when knocking at the door, both in the UK or in Spain, is this something, Marc and Laura, is this something transversal? In terms of businesses, should we be knocking at one or two ministries in particular, or is this more complicated because R&D tax, local government?
The innovation funding landscape is pretty wide, and we have different tax incentives as well as national and regional R&D and innovation incentives, as well as for capital expenditures related to sustainability. So it's very interesting that we understand that there are plenty of opportunities for both large companies and small businesses. So here, a good plan, as I've said before, that you included in your budgets, so to boost your opportunities in the short term and in the future is very important. And the situation, the context couldn't be better for this, because we have plenty of opportunities, both from the national government, but also at least in the EU, from the funds coming from the EU Commission. So now it's very important that you, this year, before the end of the year, identify your projects, your capital expenditures, and see if they are aligned with the new opportunities that are going to start coming in Q2, probably, even in Q1. So it's very important.
Yeah, Eva, I think it's clear that the study showed that public funding is really important for businesses. And I would say for businesses to lobby wherever they can. You know, the UK is somewhat more centralised than Spain, I think. So it's mostly lobbying central government, and that could be through, you know, the British Chamber of Commerce. I mentioned the Confederation of British Industry, your local MP, for example, your local council. I think the more noise, the better, really. You know, it is absolutely vital to maintain and improve the incentives, the grants that are available. And, you know, it's not just business that are facing fiscal challenges at the moment, government's certainly facing fiscal challenge. So what we wouldn't want to do is to sort of balance budgets by looking to pull back on incentives for R&D.
Thank you. I see the hand of Leon Moltonevsky. Let me see whether I'm saying your surname correctly. Would you like to speak directly to the speakers, Leon?
Yes, if I could. Thank you very much for the brilliant presentation. I have a comment and a question. First, I will support Mark when you said about not being complacent. And there is a recent research published by BCG that even though the priority currently is cost cutting, but those companies that do not invest into the future, they will be left behind. So the long-term value, 3-5 years ahead, does depend on current investments and innovation, yes? And the question is, in Spain, there are lots of wealthy companies and families. Private bankers, they prioritize Spain in Europe. There is a lot of family money. But then, as you've mentioned, private investment, venture capital is much smaller. So do you have an explanation why is it the case? The traditional money, they don't want to go into those areas.
Actually, case. And taking also a question I'm seeing in the chat that we can go through afterwards, then you know that in Spain there is a lot of small businesses. So this is the case mainly. Usually when it comes to innovation, they need to take into account that it's very important that they have an innovation management plan. They have to invest in innovation to be resilient, and in this context, it's very important because you need to look farther, not only in the short term. And cost cutting here is going to be a problem at the end, because the investing in innovation makes your company more resilient. And in the case of the type of funding, yes, usually it's something that happens in Spain that we see in the Barometer compared to the UK, and we have gone through this. Mark has already explained that actually it's not very usual and that common in Spain that in the UK or the US to use this kind of venture capital or other funding. But more and more we're seeing in the really innovative small businesses that is becoming more and more popular. But yes, taking this risk is usually the factor probably to the situation. I don't know, Mark, you want to add something to this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not overly familiar with the investment market in Spain, but there are certainly a couple of incentives for investors in the UK which prove very popular, and they're specifically designed to encourage investment in small, medium-sized enterprises, early stage businesses focused on technology development. So perhaps the Spanish government could look at similar incentives there to target investment, because clearly, you know, if there are large family offices, you know, wealthy individuals, they will be looking to invest their money somewhere. And I think if you can make it more attractive to invest in, you know, startups in R&D type businesses, then hopefully that sort of turns the tide and people start investing more in those businesses. They can be more successful. Following up on the question that was in the chat, which was somewhat related, was saying 99% of total Spanish companies are SMEs, but by far the least involved. That's a great question, because we've actually found that from our own research. We're currently developing and launching across the world, a targeted support system for helping some of the smallest businesses with their R&D tax claims, and our colleagues in developing really limited. I think it's somewhat less limited in the UK, but I think we should be doing everything we can to publicize the support that's available. You know, investment will be one side of it, but if there are other support available for companies that are looking to start up, develop new technology, I think it's vital that they access the public funds that are already available to them.
And it's very important. This is sorry about just to add something that to remark the opportunities for small businesses coming from Europe. Again, it's very important from both Horizon Europe and these Next Generation EU programs.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Mark, because you've already advanced and answered the question from Martín García Vaquero. Martín is very well known to the Chamber Network. And yes, probably we've got here some homework. We should probably be approaching some association, some confederation of SMEs, and try to do a specific webinar on why SMEs, which is the large chunk of the industry base in Spain, is not really making use or being able to have access to tax incentives for R&D. So, Martín, I think your question has been answered. And then I will finish with one about the European Union, which is quite timely because of the situation in which by the 31st of December, the UK will have left the European Union, which is what will happen. It is from José Antonio Blanco. What will happen with the UK startup spin-offs involved in Horizon 2020 and R&D funds? Really, these UK companies know the future situation. If they want to receive these funds, will they be forced to establish agreements with EU countries? What should be the role of Spain for this issue? Thank you. And with that will be the last question before we go to the closing.
Okay, thanks, Eva. Probably makes sense for me to step in first. Yeah, I think there's a great deal of uncertainty with the way the negotiations are going. This is just one of a lot of issues that's still to be still up for negotiation. That, you know, whatever the outcome, that they will step in to provide equivalent funding to that which the UK businesses receive from Horizon 2020 going forward. But I don't think that's the only benefit from working in a program like Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe. You know, when I've spoken to businesses, it is the collaboration with other businesses in Europe, with other educational institutions across the continent that seek sort of new ideas, new insight, combining technologies from different sectors, different businesses that really help develop some of these new technologies. You know, a lot of new technologies now are tremendously complex, and it's very difficult for companies in isolation to develop those, and it's very difficult for countries the size of the UK or Spain to develop all these new technologies in isolation. So I think, you know, international collaboration is absolutely vital. So it remains to be seen whether we continue to participate in Horizon Europe. You know, I think the government should do all it can to make sure that there is the opportunity for the UK, for UK business to collaborate with its European counterparts.
Thank you, Mark. I can already say that at the moment, the main slogan of the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain is to build bridges, and never better than in front of this beautiful photograph of a bridge in which we have figures of British investment in Spain and bilateral trade and movement of citizens between the two countries, which makes us be in a lot of interest to continue collaboration. This Innovation Committee will try to identify, through the help of the British Embassy, which are the opportunities from the 1st of January 2021, when the scenario will clearly be different. And with this question, talking about the European Union, I'd like to pass the floor to Clara Eugenia Garcia. We are very honored to have Clara Eugenia Garcia, who is Counselor for Research and Innovation at the Spanish Permanent Representation to the European Union. She has been since 2008 in different areas of government concerning science and innovation policy. She was Director General of Scientific Policy from 2016 until 2018, Deputy Director General of Planning and Monitoring from 2011 until 2016, and Advisor of the Minister for Science and Innovation from 2008 until 2011. Her areas of research and interest are the economics of innovation, knowledge transfer and IPR regimes, R&I data and indicators, the application we said that we really appreciated having someone with a European vision, and we are really, really grateful that she has found the time to be with us today to close the webinar. And after her, I will thank everybody and I will close the webinar. Clara Eugenia, all yours. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Eva. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much to the organizers, and I would like to congratulate Ayming for the initiative of these very interesting results we had been commenting this morning about the Innovation Barometer 2021. And thank you also to the Innovation Committee of the British Chamber of Commerce. You are right, Eva, when Ayming asked me to just have these final words, I was not really very conscious of the huge responsibility that it represents. I think I have been just conscious of the complexity and the responsibility that I'm bearing today by just addressing these closing remarks after listening to the presentations and listening also to the questions by the audience. There are several issues that are really highly political. I'm not sure if I can provide answers to some of them, but I will try. Being said that, it's a great honor to have this opportunity and to be this morning with you. I have structured my intervention around 4 basic blocks. Some of them are related to some of the questions that had been already mentioned. The first one is what we mean by innovation, because innovation is a very elusive concept, has different dimensions, and there are different visions on innovation. There are visions that are linked to research and technology, but there is also a different type of innovation that belongs to what we might call technologies. Categories of innovation. This is something that we discuss. We have lengthy discussions on these categories of innovation when we were working on Horizon Europe. And in particular, it was problematic, the definition of innovation from incremental to breakthrough innovation. Because since public resources, and in this case, resources coming from the framework program are very limited, we have really to focus on what kind of innovation, what category of innovation might be supported. But anyhow, I think that in spite of all those differences, we might agree and we might identify some common elements, like a common denominator for innovation. The first one is that innovation has an impact on markets, on citizens' way of life, and on companies' results. The second common idea is that innovation requires investment and directionality, and I will say smart directionality. The third common basic idea is that innovation is risky. There is no gain without pain. And what is one of the features of innovation, and that is linked to the debate and the questions that you were having on venture capital, is that risks from innovation are very often non-bankable, meaning that there is a technological risk that conventional banking business cannot afford. There is also a common understanding that innovation comes from companies, from business companies, and from this entrepreneurial spirit. I personally will consider that we also need a lot of innovation in governments. And the last idea that I think has been also pointed out by Soraya is that innovation flourishes in an ecosystem. And the notion of this ecosystem is that is formed by a large number of very different actors, and most important, the linkages among those actors. That is very essential. One of the issues that I have here when you were talking about differences in the sources of funding for innovative companies in the UK and Spain, and is that we are talking about systems. The Spanish ecosystem is not as mature and consolidated as the UK innovation ecosystem might be. In particular, because our Spanish innovation ecosystem has very few large companies, very, very few. And our large companies are focused and operate in a very limited number of sectors. But anyhow, innovation is all about knowledge and progress, and this is very important. This is also why I feel very confident that even in a critical moment in which companies are forced by this strategy of cost savings, the ones that want to succeed in the near future, they will continue investing in innovation. There is also related to these different concepts of innovation, there is something that is particularly relevant. Since there are different concepts, I'm not sure we really know how to properly measure innovation. And might tell you that the different indicators in standard statistics and composite indicators in other rankings, they don't capture the dimensions of innovation. They are just proxies of what an innovation ecosystem is. Some of these composite indicators, they place more weight and relevance to inputs, meaning funding resources and so on. Some of them provide and focus more on outputs. But the idea that the only output of innovation activities are patents is a very limited one. At this moment, I don't have the time, not even the knowledge, to solve all these questions. The third element that is very important, in particular to understand differences in performance, are framework conditions. What are the framework conditions? I think that framework conditions, when we are discussing this kind of issues at the level of the European Union, we try to focus and to have a narrow vision of these framework conditions, meaning that is the proper functioning of the single market. In my understanding, this is a personal point of view. In my understanding, the framework conditions obviously refer to obsolete and tight regulations, often behind the technological developments and applications. Framework conditions refer to outdated practices in the management of IPRs, and also they refer to controversial standards and the setting of standards, that because often the setting of standards requires a lot of administrative and paperwork. When they are established, they are already obsolete as well. But by framework conditions, I will refer to the proper functioning of the markets in my main concern about framework conditions and the functioning of markets, and this is particularly true in the case of Spain and also in part of continental Europe, is that our markets are our market is very expensive or makes very difficult to transact within this market. In economics, we refer to this ill functioning of markets as markets that increase the transaction costs. The transaction costs are part of the opportunity costs, and I am sure that you, as representatives of business companies, you recognize these transaction costs. But transaction costs refer to red tape, to different administrative layers, to the difficulties, to thick the thickness of information in general. But now, and in order to conclude this presentation, I want to point out to something that is particularly relevant in my understanding for promoting innovation. Transaction cost is very important, I mean, lowering transaction cost is very important because in those frameworks in which transaction costs are very important, we lack, or what we find is a lack of trust. What is important in innovation is to create trust among different actors, different agents, and trust between companies and governments and regulators. I think that somehow I found evidence of trust mental asset in our economies, and in particular for innovation. When I refer to trust, I refer also, it's a kind of trust and confidence between business companies and governments. This is critical. It's very important to have this confidence in governments, and this is one of the pending issues we have to work in the future. And let me tell you that actually the tendency goes in just in the opposite way. After the pandemics and this crisis, what is showing is an increasing decoupling between citizens, society, business representatives, and governments. But I feel positive and optimistic, and I think that it's very important to start working and to restore trust and start working in a direct dialogue with governments, because based on the previous discussion, and just I'm just covering very broadly some of the topics. What I think is very important is to make governments to understand that what is needed is a smart directionality of the public R&I investments. As I told you in terms of Horizon Europe, that is also the truth for a small budget in R&I, like the budget of the Spanish government. We cannot just finance all those activities, research and activities. Smart directionality is very important, and for smart directionality, what is also very important is to have a constructive dialogue with different actors in order to make investments complementary. The second element, which is critical now, is to support startups and innovative SMEs, because startups are the kind of companies that are very innovative, but they present or they represent a non-bank the lack of venture capital is one of the structural characteristics of, or is one of the structural problems that we have in continental Europe. It's very important also to support innovative SMEs through different direct instruments. But as important as to support innovative SMEs is to support large companies and to support the scaling up of mid-caps, because they have an important role in our ecosystem. It's also true that the instruments, just thinking in terms of policy instruments, the instruments that we have in our hands, they should be totally different for scaling ups, for startups, or for large and multinational, including multinational companies operating here in Spain. My last two ideas is that for sure, one of the main responsibilities for public policies is to support excellence in research, to promote linkages between research and industry, and to provide a constant and well-trained workflow of talent. That's all for today. I'm sure that you might have some questions concerning Horizon Europe, the negotiations, how are we going to solve right now the feature of the association of the UK in Horizon Europe, but I'm open to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clara Eugenia. This is a great opportunity to have you closing and bringing the European Union framework, which is much wider than just the Spanish and the UK one. I'm conscious of time. We're running out of time. I could ask the audience if they would like to ask one question to you, and if not, they can always send the questions to either Ayming's team or the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain, and we could direct them to you. So if there is any quick question from anyone in the audience, we would appreciate that Clara Eugenia has shown availability to reply, and if not, I will just simply wrap up and thank all of you. Is there anybody who wants to jump with a quick question? We've got a shy audience, right? So, Clara Eugenia, you've been saying a lot of interesting and challenging things. And the wish that I'd like to transmit from both Ayming and the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain, and specifically the companies of the Innovation Committee, is that we want to continue collaborating with you. If I can wrap up this very interesting presentation of the International Barometer, we obviously have an obligation and a compromise to provide update information, and specifically you have been bringing to our attention the group of SMEs and startups, because you have been mentioning that the lack of venture capital is one of the structural problems. We obviously have to bring this more to the attention of this venture capital. We have to probably be a bit more challenging by where venture capital could go outside the UK, which is our core business, and speak to the European Union and speak to the countries that have been mentioned before, who seem to be leading innovation in some of the indexes. You have mentioned the measurement of innovation. Measurement of innovation seems to be a critical element. Very often there are countries that are accused of not investing enough innovation, but very often is that a lot of that innovation is not measured. So that measurement, that mapping, seems to be one of the internal problems that innovation has. And finally, and thanks to you, I can assure that this Innovation Committee has in one of the key objectives to develop constructive dialogue between business and government. This is probably the most powerful tool that a modest association like the British Chamber of Commerce in Spain has. We are independent. We don't owe ourselves to any government. We only represent the interests of our businesses, and we know very well that way of Anglo-Saxon power, that way of doing soft power that you all know that the Anglo-Saxons do especially well. So thank you, Ayming, Mark and Laura. Thank you, Clara Eugenia. Thank you, Guillermo, Chairman of our Innovation Committee. And I just hope that we have soon another opportunity to speak to you all. Remind you that on a frequency of at least every 2-3 months, we do a webinar about a topic, and that we will be in touch very soon. So any companies interested in joining us, in joining efforts and in collaborating, you know that you can come to me or to anyone in my team. Thank you, and have all a very good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Goodbye.